This is a GK Media podcast.
This podcast is part of the GK Media Studios Creators Network, helping people tell their stories. Become a storyteller today and learn about our podcaster network at gkmediastudios.com.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Garry Talks. I'm your host, Garry Kelly, and I'm delighted to be joined online by Hutton Henry, founder of Beyond M&A. Hutton, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Garry. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell people a little bit about your business first, please?
Yeah, sure. So our business effectively works on behalf of investors, and we assess companies to help them understand technology, people, and processes. The simplest way to think of us, we're like a house surveyor on behalf of an investor, but instead of surveying a house, we survey a business and every bits and pieces of it, and then come back with our findings.
There's two areas that a business will often focus on. It's during the process of running the business, it's running an effective business. And a lot of that comes down to having good people working with you. And then the next phase for some businesses is that exit strategy, deciding to put the feet up, move to a sunny location and be drinking margaritas all day long on a beach. But talk to me about the importance, because you even said yourself, it's your primary business value, the importance of having people in the right role.
Yeah. So you're right, Garry. So our primary company value is people first. So, it's common sense that a business is really an amalgamation of people and the value that they create and derive together. And so I think it's just been a very long sort of part of my experience where, yes, we can look at the P&L and we can look at the products. Why don't we take it back a step and look at the people? And, to me, it's a very passionate sort of endeavor. It's an obvious area to look, but we don't like looking there because it's a very sensitive area to look at as well.
Yeah, it can create difficulties in an organization if you kind of open up the books and start looking at things in finer detail, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting on reflection on, the dynamics that we withstand or we don't try and address over a chronic period of time. That I can instantly recall companies that have had that one person that's impacted the whole team for more than 10 years, and it's like, why don't we sort this out? And I know why. Because I do exactly the same. If you're in the middle of it, it's very hard to deal with.
Yeah. And does it create a problem when it comes to the exit or the sale of a business if you're taking on, we'll say, people who just aren't suitable?
It's a really good question, Garry. And, to put this in context, we look at about 5 to 7 businesses a month. So my endeavor is to really help founders understand what we look for on behalf of investors, because everyone wins. And to answer your question, the reality is as the investors or the buyers and companies like ours get to know the firm, we sense those people issues. We just can't help it, and even if we do everything over video, you tend to see it from people's behaviors. And I just have these really sort of strong feelings that why don't we as founders or people who run small businesses, why don't we fix those things before Gordon Ramsay comes in to save the kitchen? You know what I mean? Because it's so damned obvious to all of us.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you use technology then, isn't it? Like, you've developed technology to actually figure out, is it the psychometrics of people and the role?
Yeah, so we didn't develop it. It's from Arizona, but we effectively assess, and it's been around for a while. 40 years or so. But we assess how people react naturally to stress. So we can actually mark that, and we all have and to creative tasks, and it gives you a number. So it's not a personality test. It's not DISC. It's not Myers-Briggs, all those very popular ones. This work it complements everything that's out there. And the way I like to explain it to people is, do you know when you've hired somebody, right, and you've looked at their CV and you've had a fantastic interview and, oh, I love that person. And then, you start working together and everyone has such high hopes. And then 2 months later, for some reason, it's not working out, right? And you're like, oh, it didn't really meet the expectation. And so that's the bit that we can assess. That's the real you. And what's really fascinating is part of the brain. It's not your cognitive side. It's called your conative side. And conative is your natural instinct. And in the context of small businesses, we often run quite blind, and we kind of know there's a problem, and this just lays it out on the table and say, look, no wonder you haven't got XYZ happening in terms of scaling. A really good example was a firm that they wanted to scale, and there was like 48 people in there, and when we assessed all of them, they were all exactly the same. Even if they looked different, how they operated underneath the tin, if you like, was exactly the same. That's why they couldn't get any extra sales.
That's amazing, because even I was speaking to someone recently who was talking about a CEO that came into a business and they're 10 years in that business and they ended up employing key managers, senior leads in the organization that aligned exactly with their qualities rather than trying to fill in the gaps. And the organization has since lost a lot of workers because it's completely changed the culture. And it's, it's not, you can sense if you were to go in there that the energy of the place has changed. And it's interesting where at the very top that there's no difference. Everyone is literally just the same sort of personality.
Yes, yeah. So, and personality testing is on one side. This is literally how the entire management team would react to stress. And if we're all the same, we're not going to look at things in this like 3D way. And so we call it cloning. And if you've got the cloning in your team, that situation you mentioned, if you're all fact finders and people who like to stroke their beards, because I haven't got any hair, but I've worked with some management teams where they've taken over and they haven't got the original sort of founders need, their zest, their sort of risk taking and the forward feature. It's like we are really good operators, and then the founder says, well, why is this not growing? And it's like, because they're missing your energy. They're missing your way of thinking, which might be a bit mavericky. It might be a bit different, but that's the thing that got it going. So your question earlier was, how does it impact your deal or your exit? Well, we got to design our teams in a way that's self-sufficient and creative and productively creative.
So it's interesting there as well, what you're talking about in terms of stress, that it's not always a negative, that there are benefits to having stress in terms of how dynamic it can make a team. Not that everyone is stressed out, yay, job done,
Yeah, absolutely, Gary. I think there's another aspect to this, which is if you are going to introduce this type of diversity into your team, it's going to create natural tensions and what you might see as stress, and the leader might take it really personally. So then what we have to teach afterwards is candor, right? We have to be able to call things out regardless of your position, from, the engineer on the floor to the person in the boardroom. They need to be able to call each other out. Everyone needs to be accountable. So that's one of the shakeups you see with this type of diversity, is that will only work if you can manage it.
A friend of mine is going through the process of selling their business. And it has been a long, frustrating process. The deal is on the table, it's off the table, terms have changed, there's this obstacle, there's that obstacle. It's been going on a very long time. Right. What advice would you give to people who are thinking of exiting?
Well, that's great. That's a really good question. I know what I definitely would state is, build a business that's worth selling first.
Yeah.
And then we have an ethos that is a business that's worth selling is one that's worth keeping, right? Because if you operate it at the higher levels, the ones that really get the attraction are run at such a good way. They're very, very attractive to the investors. They're still very attractive to the management. And we ran a couple of weeks ago, we ran this live session in person with 25 business owners, and we got them to run through an assessment of about 20 questions, all of the holes that are in there. So the number one issue that all of them have, lack of documentation. It's like, just get it done, and but the companies who thread in a little tiny bit through their normal working day and that they don't rush it at the end. So that's what most founders do, right? Is we build it and we focus on revenue. And that, I would say, that's 98% of the companies we assess. And then they want to exit. So they spend a year or two readying it for that. But the really good ones, they got the right knowledge at the beginning and they started to build that story from very early on. It's a bit like telling children to do their homework. We know it's good for us, but we don't want to do it. So the advice isn't really do that. It's really go and learn what needs to be done and then see if you want to do it, because that will maximize your value. And without giving away your friend's details or anything, I mean, were there things in the way his company's operating or her operating that sort of changing, or is it the market dynamics that's making the deal sort of?
I'd say part of it was probably down to documentation and how things were set up initially, that ended up tripping them down the road when it came to the exit strategy, because that wasn't even, I suppose, thought of in the early stages.
So there are so many basics that I have a workbook on that, where these are all of the things you need to get ready. And, 65 pages long. And it is very detailed. And all we're giving away is the stuff that we find right at the end of the 10-year journey. And you're right. It's like they didn't do these things in year one. And what sort of concerns me is that when you first go into those, negotiations, whether it's an investment or a buyout, everyone's excited. Everyone's a dream maker. Everyone's going to win.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then what happens is, if we keep finding these holes, the confidence keeps coming down on the founder. And I've seen, really, it breaks my heart when I see, recent one, 18-year-old company, literally the deal's gone, because of so many holes, because the founder wasn't aware.
Wow.
And so the number one thing is just helping founders be aware, I think.
And what sort of money on average are small businesses selling for now?
Oh, that's such a varied thing. I think, to be upfront, the type of work we do for the type that we price, I mean, we're really in that sort of mid-ish market. So you're looking at the 10 plus million deals easily. Nice. What we deal with, but we do talk to companies that are smaller, and I think there's that kind of, it depends what you're trying to achieve. And I mean, there's a general rule in our market of a 5-to-1 ratio, 5 million turnover, 1 profit, right? If you have that, you have a very, very valuable business to lots of different people. And so you can do a lot with that. And depending on the offering, whether it's a services company or something with unique IP or a bit of both, will definitely determine the EBITDA, and therefore the multiplier as well. So I know that's a very waffly answer,
No.
Right? But it's, I mean, I've seen, a very simplistic. Actually, I'm going to turn that question around, right? Because this is a number one motto for us, is that, market trumps everything. It trumps tech. It trumps IP, everything. It even, it trumps your product, your service. The number one thing is serving a market that is so big and hopefully really needy, because you can do a terrible job in that market, but you'll still make a lot of money. Yeah. And so we talk a lot around, there's a big difference between clever and profitable. So you can make something really clever and really unusual, or you can make something really simple and scalable and profitable. And that's where investors are really good at that piece, really.
Yeah. And is there certain industries now that are really rising in the market, and others that were always sure bets that are beginning to decline?
That's a really good one. So I think in terms of the deals that are coming to us that we're seeing, there's a couple of rising areas. One of them I'm not surprised about is university spin-outs.
Okay.
Something that's been researched at in uni and then coming to market. Now, 5 years ago, if you saw one of them on your desk, it's like, oh, it's going to be so hard work, and I'm not sure if it's very commercial. But because of the advent of AI, these are the people that have been doing 5 or 10 years work. Their value is very high. So you notice that I didn't say AI is the thing. It's where it comes from and the people behind it. So proper PhDs and engineers, these really smart people, I think that's definitely on the up. I quite like services companies. I really like working with them of all different types, car mechanics, IT services, marketing. They seem to be, there's a good appetite for those. And I think because quite a good level of interaction and spend in those areas still.
True.
And the other one, which is really market led rather than investor, is anything to do with compliance. So if you lock your business into some kind of government scheme or need, and it can be a very simplistic business, but it super scales. I've seen some really good, 50, 60 million pound deals for very, very small businesses in those markets.
Wow. And then in terms of businesses that just really, maybe even since COVID, are just not as strong or don't have as much interest to investors now than they would have maybe 10 years ago.
Well, I think the big one there is the ones that just churn money. The big change since COVID was prior to COVID, it was all about growth at whatever cost. Get the customers on. We'll keep spending money. So the big change has been, I need to see profitability, even if it's small, within a much shorter time. So that's definitely the change. And then the other change has been bootstrapped firms, that are literally side hustles or, something that people have added to the side of their existing business and then bootstrapped it and not taking investment and found a market and then sell it that way. So
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I can even see as well that a lot of businesses that have started up in the last couple of years that would be very much opening up on trend. So something that's trending, they're just not lasting like they would have before. A year or two, they're gone again.
I think it's very hard to raise as well, right? So, and the other thing is there's possibly there's a major thing that's happened in the software world where AI has created a class system. So to do AI properly, you need millions of pounds, where prior to what was happening, prior to this, we all used to be able to spin up a website and get something to you within a day or two. It's gone back to heavy research and spending money on people, right? So there's a two-class system, the old style software company or the new research heavy company. And so that class system is quite interesting.
You're based in West London. How has business been in the last few years? Because again, there has been a number of changes, in the business industry in the UK between COVID, Brexit. We've all been affected by wars taking place. The economies are constantly changing. There's been a lot of changes in government for you as well over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So how's that affected things on the ground for people in business?
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's not interesting. It's a bit sort of scary at times, right? So, I think, whatever's happened with all these successive events, including that budget, right? And I was speaking to someone and they said to me, Hutton, what's really, really interesting about that particular budget, that had more impact than COVID on the market in our world, in investment.
This is the recent budget of 2024.
No, the trust one, a couple of years ago.
All right. Okay. Liz Truss's.
Yeah. So the cabbage thing, wasn't it, or the lettuce thing? But,
that's right. Yes.
Yeah, and so that was quite shocking because you really saw things really fall apart, and so last year, I mean, I wouldn't do it over 4 years. COVID was a crazy time. Wages were overinflated. I do think there's a very interesting person to watch, not for the reason that most people watch him, but Elon Musk, because of the way that he has quite an impact on how we run our companies. So when he got rid of a lot of staff in that Twitter business, everyone else started to copy him, right? And that created, like, in my opinion, I can't prove it, but it's funny timing, because prior to that event, when we were assessing companies and you would give me your financial model and the operating model and all the people involved, right? You would have probably given me some hires and things. And I would have been prior to that Twitter thing, I usually would be going back to you and the investor saying, there's not enough money in here. You're asking for all these people. They cost a lot of money. And people could ask any wage at that time. Then he chopped those staff. Everyone started to do it. And then they started to realize they could get on with less. Right. So he started that one, I think. And then someone else picked up on that and said, that could be right. But also look at what else he did by doing that. He made his own hiring cheaper for all of his businesses. I was like, wow, I hadn't even thought. I mean, I can't even think in that concentric way. And being back in the tech thing, he's very much into this movement of cloud exit, which is not very technical. It's basically people coming off the cloud and putting stuff back into their companies.
All right. Okay.
That's huge.
Break that down into a practical example of what one would be taken off the cloud.
So I think he took big chunks of Twitter off the cloud, right? So let's go back to what's the original problem is people are moving their computer systems up there. Yeah. And that really enables a lot of flexibility. But once you're locked in with the vendor, they can start increasing prices. And what tends to happen is you start to use it more than you need. So there's two price increases. That's the problem statement. Yes, is you don't really have control of your costs. And in these, they're quite technical companies. They're like, these fees are costing me a lot of money. And and I now know that my product works. So I'm going to take it off the cloud and put it onto my own computers, but I'm not renting these computers, they're mine. And so you've gone from a subscription model to a persistent model. And it's a big saving for him. It's sort of, I think, I don't remember how much he got 60% savings from it. Because he had I've just looked it up. He had $100 million cloud bill.
Wow.
And he brought it down to his office off the cloud and he saved 60 million.
Wow. That's unreal.
Yeah. So it will only impact certain companies, but it is quite an interesting trend.
It is, because it is that thing of just stepping back as well and maybe not, saying, oh, this is the way forward because this is what everyone is doing, and actually say, well, maybe it's the way forward that brings us down a tunnel that we don't want to end up being down, because everything is becoming subscription based as well now, as an example.
Yeah.
Like every year when I go through my accounts, the subscriptions have increased. And I'll always say, okay, I'm going to look back next year and decide, do I still need these subscriptions? But they creep up all the time. And and I suppose even coming for an exit strategy or investors or whatever, you do have to be lean with your costs and really decide, are these costs necessary? Are they making our business more efficient or not?
Yeah. And if you can't, I mean, going to that area again, it's sort of the most important thing is to think, well, if there's any, you're saying, asking me, well, what can a founder do today, or a business leader or whatever? One of the most important things is, rather than say, go and get prepared, change your mindset to what they're actually going to assess if I exit is my historical decision making. That's the term we use all the time, right? So if I was to look at your business, I would ask you 400 questions. I would look for 3 to 5 years of documentation, right? And all I'm trying to piece together is what you've told me. Does it match what's inside your business? And if you're running a business where you think you've got governance and accountability and someone's going to check one day, not in some fearful way, you'll run your business better, right? You'll be like, okay, I need to spend an hour a week on documenting these areas or whatever, standard operating procedures, whatever it's going to be. So there's 3 things we look at from as a business owner, which is, we want to check your communication, your consistency, and if you care. That's how we put it, is the 3 C's.
Wow.
And if you get through those 3 C's, that's what we're checking. You'll get 3 things from the investor, right? And these are the prizes: is growth, globalization, and governance.
Okay.
So
awesome.
I then say, if you go from the 3 C's to the 3 G's, fantastic. Sounds like a phone thing, right? But that last thing is governance. Why can't you find a way within your team or within your network of friends to add that little bit of governance? Because one of the things that's really important, we need some kind of accountability. It's great being the boss, but it's really better when, I think all of our output is better when there's someone above us as well.
Yeah. And just in terms of communication, can you break that down into what sort of expectations of communication you'd be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look for evidence of management meetings. We'll look at emails. We'll look at your decks, your monthly updates, your business plan. Business plan is kind of, we all know that's dead as soon as it's out there, right? So, but what we're really looking for is, I'm about to spend some money on X because I think we can make this money, right?
Yeah.
Well, great. Is that documented? And can we follow that story? And it could be $100,000 spend or 20 grand, but can you give me some way of form of just, it's not all shooting off the hip. You have looked at it from a diverse sort of perspective. And all we're trying to do is making sure that messaging is believable on both sides. So it's realistic and opportunistic as well.
And finally, then, if someone is looking for an investor or even to exit, how much prep in advance should they be doing internally before they actually take it to that step of, actively seeking out either?
There's always it depends answer, because it's the size of business and nature of business. But I would say, number one, make sure it's self-sustainable. In terms of time, I think, most companies we look at have been working on something for a year or two. And the first year, they've been doing all their internal work, clearing it up, sorting it out. And then the next year is then going out to market to find the investor. And that's really hard work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not easy nowadays. There is plenty of money around. That's not the issue. The issue the investors have, there are not enough good companies around to put the money into.
Okay, interesting. So
that is really fascinating, isn't it? Because there is an actual genuine abundance of money. The issue is there's not high enough quality businesses to put the money into. They call it dry powder.
Okay. And in a nutshell, to simplify that, it basically means that people don't see that they're going to get a bang for their buck by investing in this company in terms of growth or sustainability.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because you've got the pre-seed, the very early stage, and that's all about buying into the founder and your vision and just getting it out there and giving it a go, right? But as the companies like mature, then we want to see your processes and how you serve your market. And, it's definitely in services companies. We're really interested in your quality service process. How do you look after people? Because you've won the market, but how do you retain them? So retention, churn, all of those sort of normal areas are quite important. And you get to a certain stage, you can work that all off a P&L.
Who would go to you then? Would it be investors or people looking for investors?
Who would come to us?
Yeah.
So our predominant message to the market is the investors, but we do work with founders. Like we've got a great network of them. We just don't put it on our front door because it's too messy. Right? I did used to do that. I used to say I had my catch line was, I help investors and founders maximize the value of their business. That was my catchphrase. But then we realized that it doesn't really help both sides. It's sort of so they all come to us really around, can we do a check of the business, but the benefit you have with us, it's not the book you get on business exit. This is the stuff we see so commonly as issues. Are you doing those things? Because they're going to come out within week 1 or 2, and you may as well sort them out now.
Yeah.
And by sorting out those common mistakes, you sort out an awful lot of other issues.
So it's Beyond M&A is the company. What's M&A then?
The mergers and acquisitions aspect of it. That's what it is.
Excellent, yeah. Excellent. Do you mind, Hutton, if we put your Linktree URL address in the description of this podcast?
Absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant, because I think anyone listening to this episode and getting great insights into what Hutton is speaking about, he has loads of great stuff on his Linktree account. So, and for those who aren't familiar with Linktree, it's like a URL address, and then you can put in multiple URL addresses in it that'll bring you to podcasts, videos, PDF documents, and so on. And there's loads of great material there that Hutton has for people, and there's scorecard exercises they can do and everything. Hutton, thank you so much for joining me today on Garry Talks.
It's really great. Thank you for the questions and insights on your side as well. Thank you.